Hi. Welcome to hashtag How to Run for Mayor, the Grandfather Clause. This 6th week we discuss the city post 1892 and pre-1911. Let's get prepared so we may begin.
6th prerequisite. The city post 1892 and pre-1911. With the first Mississippi River Bridge completed in 1892, a door to the west was opened for traffic and trade. People had more space, unfortunately, due to the yellow fever epidemic that hit the city hard in the 1870s. City leaders then were known as presidents of the tax district: Porter, Overton, Hadden, Bethell, and Clapp, who later was elected mayor, because sovereignty comes from the vote of people that the city lacked then. After 1892, the state of the city changed drastically, anti-lynching campaigns ensued, and a still booming cotton industry thrived. A lot happened socially, politically, and legally in the 19 years after the events of 1892 and until 1911 that relative peace and stability thereafter would result, where in its light, we in Memphis now bask. The Supreme Court decision of Plessey v. Ferguson, decided May 18, 1896, stemmed from Homer Plessy in 1892 boarding a whites-only car, violating Louisiana's Separate Car Act of 1890. John Howard Ferguson was the judge who denied the request of Plessey's defense to dismiss the case on the grounds of unconstitutionality. With the Louisiana Supreme Court upholding Ferguson's decision, Plessy went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Sure, theoretically, separate but equal sounds good, but in reality, things didn't change overnight and Memphis didn't get a dime for Reconstruction. The Reconstruction was how Northern whites justified separate but equal to those Southern, as if the North and South were not distinguished economically, as those white Southerners held previous slaves. Citizens, distraught from the panic of 1893, elected McKinley to fix the Depression, where with Roosevelt after his assassination the city was on a positive Republican path with Malone.
When the panic of 1893 hit, it was the worst depression ever seen to that date, as the gold standard was lowered. Peter Turney, assuming the governor's office of Tennessee in January of 1893, would see Grover Cleveland's second term as president ushered in on March 4, 1893. The Democratic presidential victory was, some say, a main reason for the depression in the panic of 1893, amongst other things. A British merchant bank encouraged investment in their Argentine agent bank, which suffered in 1890 a wheat crop disaster and a failed coup that halted future investments. Cautious on how Argentina would affect the world, European investors started a run on gold in the U.S. Treasury, where specie, bullion, was preferred to paper money. The Gilded Age in the U.S. kept American standards high as its commodity prices for its international market. So, in 1893, when the wheat prices crashed, it hurt all the more. On top of that, an oversupply of silver led to debate on how much of it should be coined. The value of gold was diluted by silver's abundance, but under Cleveland the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed. In February of 1893, the first signs that railroad investors from the Gilded Age would have to take a loss, as they had been overextended, flocking to banks across the nation to withdraw, while panic in London caused Europeans to sell American stock for funds backed by gold. Though there were many bodies of people, between 1879 and 1895 in Memphis, some had none. Until 1895 and Walker L. Clapp as mayor, we can only say that we were governed by King Cotton.
On January 21, 1897, Robert Love Taylor assumed the office of Governor of Tennessee, and as President William McKinley assumed office in March of 1897, he would busy himself with fixing a depressed national economy. On his front porch campaign, he promoted sound money backed by an international gold standard. Winning the election, he presided over victory in the Spanish-American War, and obtaining territory, the nation survived the panic of 1893. However, in Memphis the blood, sweat, toil and tears of those less economically distinguished made agriculture a priority. The Memphis-Arkansas Bridge was completed in 1892, where cotton's distribution was just as rewarding as its sale. Surely, not for workers, and perhaps in some places even as if the Civil War never happened, commerce to residents for providing a safe and healthy place to transact business was certainly enough to levy a tax. With a workforce psychologically oriented to physical labor, slavery was replaced by subordination to Jim Crow laws, as cotton in Memphis, like tobacco in Virginia, was the only constant. Joseph John J. Williams was mayor of Memphis from 1898 until 1906, and would see the assassination of his Republican Party chairman and President McKinley in 1901. But that was the issue: where, when, whether man or beast can choose, they do so. Amongst those who resemble them, fish choose fish and people do humans, black and white.
As Roosevelt ascended the presidency, a Republican, he concurred with McKinley, and in 1906 James H. Malone was politically on board with the Union, that is. The environment was uniquely Southern and the atmosphere quaint, but the temperature between whites on opposite sides was heated all the more. Children would never know unless they grew up and opened the books or eyes, because the sheer volume of King Cotton coming from miles around through the Memphis, if whether or not it is taxed, or a mayor directs its traffic to and from safely. Consequently, Malone, the last Republican mayor for decades, reinforced national politics, while, unfortunately, unable to suppress Southern Jim Crow culture. A street between those in biological opposition was paved with Republicans on the good side, Democrats the other, and blacks on the sidewalks either ejected or requested from one or at another. So, blacks were still slaves, because without the luxury of time they had to accept the first available, which was 100% of the time in Memphis, at least, as whites didn't help blacks then.
Cleveland's second term in the Panic of 1893 left citizens hurt, and while McKinley was to lift the Depression, after his assassination, Roosevelt would continue on a positive Republican path. Many factors led to the panic, as all investment then was a risk to where investments in the railroad may well have been gambling on it. The silver mines flooded the market, affecting gold standard, wheat crops, you name it. It had to be fixed. Mayor James Malone left office in 1910, and things hadn't been quite the same since.
That concludes the information for this time. Next week come with us on the 7th prerequisite in the reign of E.H. Boss Crump.